Hey y'all, it's Cassie. Welcome back to Sermons for a Revolution. Each week I answer your questions about how to heal yourself so that together we can heal the world. This week's question came from someone who had read my book. And in my book I talk about grief cops. And grief cops are people who try to control and regulate how other people grieve. And any of us can become a grief cop at a certain point. So the reader wanted to know, how do I avoid becoming a grief cop? And can you tell me a little bit more about what that looks like? And I think this is such a beautiful question because it came from a place of concern for other human beings. You experience grief anytime you experience loss. And loss comes in three primary forms. Death is a loss, change is a loss, including positive changes that can happen in your life, like getting married. There's still a loss of your freedom and of everyone that you're not going to marry. Any kind of choice is a loss. So every single time we make a choice, we're actually choosing not to have everything else. Grief might look like crying or needing to talk about a death or change or a choice. So it can look like just needing to talk about those things and kind of vent or work them out. And all too often, when someone actively begins grieving in front of someone else, other people become super uncomfortable and try to make them look on the bright side instead of just being there with them. There are also other forms of policing grief that we'll talk about. When somebody starts to grief cop, the only reason that we do that is because we're uncomfortable with our own ungrieved grief. So when someone else's starts to bubble up, we have to stop it. We're going to smack it down, right? And we'll come up with all different ways to do that. But we'd be a total jerk if we were like, please stop grieving, right? So we have to come up with these kind of creative ways. We say things that sound really nice, but are nonetheless attempts to suppress other people's feelings. And we've all done it. I've done it. You've done it. The Starbucks barista has done it. Every single person on earth has probably tried to police grief at some point or another, whether we know it or not. So you might be a grief cop if you see a widow whose spouse died 6 months earlier, and you tell her she looks fabulous and ask her if she's dating yet. It takes between 2 and 5 years to grieve a long-term spouse. You might be a grief cop if you hang out with a friend who's sad after they have lost a pregnancy, and you say, don't worry, you'll get pregnant again. It's important to be there with people when they've experienced a loss. You might be a grief cop if you see someone posting on Facebook about a dead relative or some other form of loss over and over again, and you're like, I really wish they would stop posting about that on their own Facebook wall. Or after someone experiences a loss, you start reciting like these well-worn phrases that we all know, like everything happens for a reason. Can we just stop saying that? Can we just stop saying everything happens for a reason after someone dies? It's just not helpful, grief cop. Get out of here. Another way is if, let's say your best friend is moving to Paris, France, and they're sad because they're leaving everyone they love and know behind. And you're like, stop bitching, you get to move to Paris, France. You might be masking some of your own grief about their leaving. So that's what you want to get in touch with. Another way of avoiding grief or of grief policing is if you see someone crying or expressing grief and you have judgments. So they shouldn't be crying now, they shouldn't be crying here, they should be crying more, I'm so worried. We can mask our grief policing with concern. That's one of my favorite ones. If you are uncomfortable with other people's grief, then it's probably because you have your own grief to do. And listen, I'm so not a pro at this. I have attempted to shut down many, many people's grief before, even recently. And even with my judgmental thoughts about it, or my attempts to try to make them feel better in the moment instead of just listening to them. But I've learned a lot and I've come a long way. And I want to tell you a little bit about how I got here. So in my early 20s, by that point, I had suffered a lot of loss of people in my life. I'd lost friends from war and drugs and all sorts of stuff. And I'd lost people, and my family had split apart. And I had not grieved this stuff for a minute. It was maybe for a minute, but that was it. Other than that, I was just running from state to state trying to avoid feeling my feelings because it was painful and I didn't want to make other people uncomfortable. And I became this sarcasm machine. I was super judgmental of everybody, and I just had no tolerance for grievers. If somebody started to express anything that looked remotely like sorrow in my presence, I was like, oh my God, get out of here. They just want attention. I could not fathom that someone would be sad. And one day it stopped working. Like all the judgments and all of the policing of other people's grief stopped working, and I woke up and I was depressed. And if that's you, I hope you're as lucky as I was, because someone sat down with me and told me that there was nothing wrong with me. And they said, you just need to grieve. You've got ungrieved grief. There is nothing wrong with you except for you just got this stuff you have to get out of you, and it's called grief. And I hope that if that's you, that they tell you that it's okay for you to cry and break down in front of them. Find the courage to tell somebody if you're crying so hard that you can hardly speak. Hopefully they will just listen to you silently. Hopefully they won't police your grief. And hopefully they will not offer you a tissue, because offering you a tissue is a way of shutting down grief. It's another really sneaky way of shutting down grief because it seems like being helpful. But there is a way that handing somebody a tissue says, dry those tears. Don't let me see those tears. So hopefully nobody will tell you to look on the bright side or grieve faster. Hopefully they won't be afraid of your wildness, because grief is so chaotic. It is so chaotic. There's a million thoughts, there are a million feelings, and we have to be there for all of them and just hold all of them. And if you're so blocked off from grief that you can't even cry, maybe you can't even remember the last time you cried, that's okay too. Call somebody and tell them, I'm on the verge, I'm grieving right now, you just can't really tell. Like, I'm on the verge of tears, and hopefully they will be there with your non-crying grief for as long as you need them to be. Because if you can get over loss and get over the fear of loss, you will become fearless. Grieving is the path of least resistance. It's total surrender. It's total surrender to other people's grief. It's total surrender to your own grief. C.S. Lewis said, nobody ever told me that grief felt so like fear. And I really think that grief is fear leaving the body. So we just have to process this total fear of our ultimate demise, basically. And if we stop other people, we postpone their joy, and we postpone their own potential for awakening, because that is what grief has to offer you and for anyone that you know who's grieving. And baby, we are going for joy, and we are going for joy with like roots in the earth and a line to the sky, and there is no shortcut to that, okay? So how do you quit being a total grief cop? First of all, ditch the cop uniform and get naked. Emotionally naked. I'm not telling you to get naked and start crying in front of people. Don't do that. But God knows we've all been there. Notice if you start getting judgy, okay? Notice if you're watching somebody grieve and you start judging them or judging the situation, and just stay with your feelings and do a little self-check. Show up for grievers. Go to the funeral. Go to the wake. Be there. I know it's hard to walk in a room full of people who are mourning. You don't know what you're going to find. It's hard to look into the casket if there's an open casket, but really do that. It's important to look death right in the eye, because if we remind ourselves of our ultimate destiny, we will feel so much more gratitude for this life as we know it. When you see a widow pushing her baby in a stroller, cross the street to be with her. Don't cross the street to get away from her because you don't know what to say. Just say, hi, I'm so sorry for your loss. I love you. Grief brings us to a place where we get to learn some really deep shit. Like, all that matters is the love that you bring to people, and that love never dies. So it brings you to the stuff that can't ever die. But we've got to go through it first. We've got to be with others without telling them all the reasons they shouldn't be sad. But we've got to let people grieve and allow grief to happen in this culture. Grief is exhausting. So my suggestion is, after you've been with somebody who's been grieving, offer to do whatever they want to do. Have a cup of tea, have a smoothie, go on a walk, watch a Jane the Virgin marathon in your pajamas while eating Chinese food, whatever they want to do. For people in almost every country in the world right now, collective grief is happening. And you want to look for the people who are unafraid to grieve, because powerful activists grieve powerfully. And what that grieving process teaches us is that most of the pain we see in the world, including patriarchy and dominance and hate, underneath all that is powerful ungrieved grief. And it is so much pain from people who have never felt heard. So if we can let grievers be heard, I guarantee that we will see far less hatred and far less patriarchy and far less dominance. And we will really start to come together in this world, which it's so time for that, you all. So your spiritual experiment for this week is to get triggered on purpose. Learn from grievers. Become a student of grievers. If someone is sad around you, just be with them and like feel awkward. Like be with them, listen to them. Don't just listen. That's really all you have to do. Don't say a word, just nod and say, I hear you, I hear you, I hear you. That's all you need to do. And a new you will really be born on the other side of your own grieving and on the other side of being able to be with people who grieve. The part of you that doesn't want to grieve is the same part of you that wants you to stay small and to stay afraid. So get big and grieve. I love you guys so much. If you want to check out my book, I have a whole chapter on grief. Actually, the whole book is really about grief. It's called May Cause Love. You can get it everywhere books are sold. And it's at my website as well, CassieUnderwood.com. And let's cause some love, my friends. We are getting 2 copies of my book into every single women's prison, shelter, and rehab in the United States and Canada. We would love your help. So go on over to CassieUnderwood.com and get involved. And finally, if you have a question for this channel, submit it at my website and I will answer it as soon as possible on the channel. I love you guys so much.